So good day everyone. So for today's topic, chapter 11, we're going to talk about lessee accounting, remeasurement of lease liability. Of course, it will be discussed by yours truly, Andrea Nicole Di Bajado. Along with me is Angela May Reyes. So chapter 11 wants us, or at the end of the chapter, the learners will learn how to remeasure the lease liability in case of an extension option, to measure the lease liability when lease contains variable payment, to identify a lease modification that is accounted for separately, to know the recognition of a lease modification relating to extension of a lease term, decrease in scope of lease, and change in rental payment. So the topics that will be discussed is, of course, number 1 is extension option. Under this is yung remeasurement of lease liability. Also, we're going to talk about variable payment, lease modification, and then types of lease modification or yung mga conditions para magkaroon ng lease modification, which is extension of lease term, decrease in scope, and change in rental. So without further ado, let's begin. So first one is the extension option. So extension option, very self-explanatory, but in lease term, extension option refers to the rights granted by the lessor to the lessee, whereby the lessee has an option to extend the lease for an additional period. So when we talk about extension option, ito yung karapatan na ibinibigay sa lessee ng lessor kung saan si lessee meron siyang choice or meron siyang option na yung lease niya o yung paggamit niya dun sa asset ni lessor ay maaaring madagdagan ng additional period. For example, itong period nila is ito yung lease term lang. So if igagamitin ni lessee yung extension option niya, so mapapahaba niya pa yung paggamit niya nung underlying asset na yon. So in order to further explain or in order to further understand kung ano ba yung extension option, let's have an example. So on January 1, 2021, an entity entered into a lease of building with the following information. So annual rental payable at the end of each year is 500,000. So meaning ang babayaran niya annually is 500,000. Yung lease term niya dun sa lease contract is for 5 years, pwede niyang gamitin yon. And then yung building, ang useful life ng building is 20 years. Then yung implicit interest rate, of course, sa lease term naman or sa paggamit mo ng underlying nung asset ng iba is of course kailangan mo ng interest. So meron tayong 10% and the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 at 10% for 5 periods is 3.791. So yung present value of ordinary annuity, very familiar na naman sa atin yun, di ba? So ito yung ginagamit natin para malaman natin kung ano ba yung lease o yung current value ng lease liability natin at the end of the lease term. So ano yung current value niya ngayon para distinguish natin siya individually sa yearly dun sa 5 years. So ito yung gagamitin natin para malaman natin yung lease liability. At bakit ginagamit natin yung present value of ordinary annuity? It is because subsequent yung payments natin and even yung payment natin. Kaya dahil 500,000 at the end of each year, so ang gagamitin natin is present value of ordinary annuity. So mamaya mas malalaman natin kung ano ba yung use nitong 3.791 natin. So, the lease contained an option for the lessee to extend for a further 5 years. So, meaning, under their contract, yung lease, meron siyang option or meron yung lessee, may karapatan siya or meron siyang right to extend, meron siyang extension option to extend the lease for further 5 years. But, ang tatandaan natin, dun sa lease contract, hindi certain, it is not certain na yung extension option ay magagamit because depende naman yun sa lessee kung gagamitin niya ba yung option na to or not. But dito sa problem natin, after 3 years, on January 1, 2024, yung lessee na decide niya or gagamitin niya yung extension option. So, the lessee decided to extend the lease for a further 5 years. So, dahil nga nag-extend siya, meron tayong panibagong agreement. So, yung new annual rental payable niya at the end of each year ay imbes na 500 na lang, magiging 600,000. Then, the new implicit interest rate niya, imbes na 10, naging 8%. And then, the present value of ordinary annuity of 1 at 8% for 5 years is 3.993. Then, the present value of 1 at 8% for 2 periods is 0.857. And then, the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 at 8% for 2 periods is 1.783. So, itong mga present value, mas maiintindihan natin siya sa paggamit natin mamaya. So, bago natin ilagay itong extension option, kailangan muna nating i-measure yung initial lease contract muna natin. So, ito yung magiging table of amortization kasi diba after 3 years lang naman ginamit yung extension, meaning after 3 years lang nagbago yung mga annual payment. So, ngayon, kailangan muna nating i-record yung mga naunang 3 years. So, meron tayong table of amortization dito para mas malaman natin. So, we have the date, payment, interest, principal, and the present value. So, yung January 1, 2021, so meron tayong present value na 1,895,500. Saan natin ito nakuha? Nakuha natin tong present value na to by multiplying the 500,000, which is annual payment, times the present value of ordinary annuity at 10% for 5 periods. So, ang present value natin doon is 1,895,500. So, ano ba yung kabulugan nun? Meaning, di ba, at the end of the period, ang matatanggap talaga natin, yung lump sum na matatanggap talaga natin na kabuuan is 500,000 times 5 for 5 periods is 2,500,000. But yung 2,500,000 na yun, lump sum na yun, meaning may interest na doon. Ngayon, kailangan nating makuha yung value ng lease liability natin without the interest. That's why, kailangan natin siyang i-times sa present value of ordinary annuity at 10% of for 5 periods. So, meron tayo dyang mathematical table na nakalagay. So, hanapin lang natin 10% yung rate and then yung periods is 5 5 periods. So, ita-times lang natin dun sa annual. Sa annual. Dahil bakit ordinary annuity? Kasi annually na tayong nagbabayad. So, ang present value lang talaga ng liability natin is 1,895,500. Pero, so at the end, December 31, 2021, so bakit December na yung kasunod? Kasi diba nagbabayad daw tayo at the end of each year. So, sa 3 years natin na binayad, nagbayad tayo ng 500. So, 2021, December 31, 2021, and then December 31, 2022, and then December 31, 2023. So, yung present value natin ng January 1 ay 1,895,500. Tapos, nagbayad tayo ng 500,000. So, yung 500,000 na yan, yung 500,000, it's a lump sum na. So, yung 500,000 na yan, nandun na yung interest at yung ating principal na binabayad. So, yung interest natin, nakuha siya by multiplying the 10% from 1,895,500. So, ito, kuha natin yung interest natin na 189,550. So, that's the 10%. Tapos, yung principal natin, nakuha lang natin siya by subtracting the interest from the payment na binayad natin, which is 500,000 minus the 189,550. So, yung principal natin is 310,450. So, meaning, ano ba yung principal? Meaning, dun sa present value natin, ang nabayaran lang dun sa present value natin for the year 2021 is 310,450. So, ito yung pinaka-further computation. So, yeah, yung payment natin 500,000, interest natin is 189. So, ang difference nila is the principal amount, tapos yung present value natin, which is 1,895,500, minus natin yung principal na binayad ng 2021. So, magiging lease liability natin as of December 31, 2021 na lang is 1,585,050 pesos. So, yung the same goes on na dun sa yung magiging process, ganoon na din yun. So, for 2022 and for 2023. So, of course, kailangan natin itong i-journal entry. So, ang journal entry natin for 2021, sa January 1, ang journal entry natin ay, kukunin muna natin yung lease liability. Of course, the right of use asset na may separate line siya, which is, right of use asset, yung present value, 1,895,500, and then lease liability, kasi yun yung babayaran natin. Then at December 31, ang binayaran natin is 500,000. Yung 500,000 na yan, bumubuo dyan is yung interest expense of 189,550. Lease liability natin doon is 310,450, meaning, yung 310, ito yung principal na binawas natin sa lease liability. Tapos, of course, kailangan nating depreciate, kasi tayo yung gumagamit ng asset na building, so kailangan natin, tayo din yung mag-shoulder, yung lessee din yung mag-shoulder ng depreciation. So, out of from the present value nung lease liability natin, i-divide natin siya sa 5, so magkano yung depreciation natin? That will be 379,100 accumulated depreciation. So 5 years na, kasi 5 years lang naman yung term natin. So ngayon, after 3 years now, kailangan in-exercise natin, di ba? Nag-exercise tayo ng lease extension option. So ngayon, dahil nga nag-exercise tayo or ginamit natin yung extension option, magkakaroon tayo ng remeasurement of lease liability. So ito na yon. So on January 1, 2024, the lease liability is remeasured. Kailangan natin siyang ulitin kasi meron tayong bagong interest, di ba? From 10% naging 8%. So kailangan yung natitira na mga term, kailangan baguhin din siya. So yung annual payment natin, so yung babayaran natin, di ba, is 500,000. So that's the lease term natin, 500,000, yung natitirang 2. Kasi di ba, 3 years lang yung, pero 3 years lang yung nauna. So yung 2 years natin is 500,000 pa rin yun. I-multiply na natin siya, babaguhin na natin, hindi na siya present value of ordinary annuity of 1 at 10% for 5 periods kasi kailangan natin baguhin yung implicit rate. So, kailangan natin baguhin yung present value. So, i-multiply natin siya sa present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 at 8% kasi ito na yung implicit rate for 2 periods kasi yun na lang yung natitira. Yung 2024 natin nababayaran na 2025. So, that will be 1.783. So, makikita lang din yun sa table na may naka-table naman na required. So, yung present value nung 500 na lang natin, yung lease liability natin natitira is 891,500. So, ito na lang yung lease liability natin dun sa original na lease contract natin. So, ngayon, nag-extend tayo. So, kailangan natin yung i-measure, of course. So, yung annual rental natin for further 5 years na para sa 2026, starting 2026. Bakit siya nag-start ng 2026? Kasi, di ba, matatapos yung lease term natin ng December 31, 2025. So, January 1, 2026, bago na yung ating lease contract, extension na siya. So, yung for 5 years na yon ay 600,000. I-multiply din ulit natin, of course, present value of ordinary annuity at 8% kasi 8% yung interest niya for 5 periods kasi gagamitin natin siya for 5 years. That will be 3.993. So, ang present value natin is, ang present value ng January 1, 2026 is 2,395,800. Pero, i-multiply pa natin siya sa present value of 1 at 8% for 2 periods. Why? Kasi kailangan natin siyang i-discount kasi itong 2,395,800, ito yung present value natin ng January 1, 2026. Pero nasa January 1, 2024 pa lang tayo. Kaya kailangan natin siyang i-discount dun sa present value niya at 8% for 2 periods, which is 0.857. So, bakit hindi ordinary annuity yung ginamit? Present value lang. Because isang transaction lang siya. Kaya present value lang because it is just a single transaction at hindi naman tayo nagbabayad annually. Kaya present value lang. So, ang magiging preso, kapag minultiply natin siya, lalabas yung present value of January 1, 2024. That will be 2,053,200 pesos. So, yun nga, yung present value of new rentals ngayon ay i-reverse discount ka natin siya ng 2 periods on the date of extension. So, yung present value, i-add natin yun. Yung present value ng remaining natin, 800, ito yun, galing dito yun, 891,500, i-add natin yung present value ng bago nating rental. So, that will be, ang total present value natin ng January 1 is 2,944,700. Tapos, mamaya may table siya, may present value. Ima-minus natin yung table natin, meaning dito sa table na to. So, ito, ima-minus natin yung 867,910. So, saan ang galing yung 867,910? Yun yung, ito yun, dito yun sa, dito sa table na to. So, ito yung present value na natitira kasi, di ba? Ito yung present value na natitira dun sa dati. So, ima-minus natin siya sa panibago para malaman natin kung magkano ba yung increase natin sa liability. Kasi ang liability natin na lang natatitira ng 2024 is dapat 867,910. Pero dahil nga nag-extend tayo, yung increase ay naging, yung increase natin sa lease liability will be 2,076,790. So, from the right of use natin na 1 million, yung original natin na 1,895,500, i-minus din natin, tatanggalin din natin yung accumulated depreciation natin, di ba? Kasi nag-minus natin yung right of use asset na yun. So, yung 379, that will be the accumulated depreciation natin yearly, the times for 3 years, kasi yun yung nawala, expired na. So, i-minus natin. So, yung carrying amount na lang ng December 31, 2023, yung right of use asset, ang carrying amount niya na lang ay 758,200. I-add natin yung liability, kasi i-add natin yung extension option. So, ang magiging bagong carrying amount is 2,834,990. So, under IFRS 16, tatandaan natin, paragraph 39, it provides na yung remeasurement of lease liability is adjustment. So, meaning, itong remeasurement ng lease liability, if there will be extension option, exercise ng extension option, ay magiging adjustment yun ng carrying amount ng right of use asset. Hindi lang siya ng lease liability. So, yung magiging amortization table natin is ganito. So, magsa-start tayo ng 2024, ito na yung present value natin. Diba? Ito yung accumulated present value from the old and the new ones, and then yung binabayad natin, bakit 500 pa to? Kasi diba, 2024, 2025, 500 pa rin yung annual natin. So, interest rate, 8% nito, then ima-minus lang natin yung payment natin to interest para makuha yung principal. So, and also, then yung principal, ima-minus natin sa present value para makuha yung present value as of 2024. Then, pagdating sa 2026, imbes sa 500, magsa-start na tayo ng new rentals, which is 600,000, and the process will be the same. So, dito lang, yung 8% is equal to 44,343. So, dito yon. Nagkaroon ng pagkakamali kasi dapat yung ating present value is dapat 4 decimals kasi yun. Pero ang kinukuha lang dito sa example is 3 decimal. Kaya nagkaroon ng difference dahil nga sa present value. So, yung magiging journal entries natin for 2024 will be to remeasure the lease liability kasi idadagdagan natin yung right of use natin, di ba? Ang right of use natin, mababa na siya yung carrying amount niya. So, yung to remeasure it, idadagdag natin yung increase. So, that will be 2,076,719 and then yung lease liability increase nga din niya, idadagdag natin yon. Also, to record the annual, so magkano yon? So, 2024, 500,000 pa rin. So, that will be interest expense galing dun sa amortization, then lease liability, 264,426. So, galing din siya sa amortization table. And to record the annual, imbis ngayon, i-record din natin yung depreciation, pero imbis na 5 years, 7 years siya kasi ang right of use asset natin ay magagamit pa natin siya ng 7 years. So, ang depreciation natin, yung 2,834,990, yun yung present value. I-divide natin sa 7 years. So, that will be the depreciation natin na babawa. So, the total lease term kasi is 10 years dahil nga nag-expire na yung 3 years. So, 7 years na lang yung depreciation natin. So, yun yung extension period. So, after extension period, so we're gonna talk about naman sa variable payments. So, magkaiba sila sa extension period at sa variable payments, ha? Kasi ang variable payments, this refers to the payments that change depending on something in the future like inflation rate, future rates, and asset use. At it differs from extension because these changes were already included in the initial measurement. So, yun yung tatandaan. Ang extension kasi, di ba, kanina nagkaroon din ng pagbabago sa payment. Di ba, from 500, dahil nga nag-extend, so magkakaroon tayo ng 600 na yung annual payment. So, dito sa variable, ang pinagkaiba nila is that sa variable, iba-iba din yung payments, nagkakaroon ng pagkakaiba sa payment dahil nga sa mga circumstances na pwedeng mangyari in the future dahil sa inflation rate, future sales, asset use, and whatsoever. Ang pinagkaiba nila dito sa variable payments, ang variable payments, nung nagkaroon ng lease contract, alam na agad na magkakaroon, or meaning included na agad na magkakaroon ng pagbabago sa annual payment. Pero yung extension option kasi, o yung extension of a lease term, kaya lang siya nagkaroon ng pagbabago, dahil sa subsequent measurement. So, meaning, nagkaroon ng pagbabago dahil sa subsequent events. Dito, alam na agad na merong pagbabago from the time na nabuo yung lease contract. Alam niya na agad na magkakaroon ng pagbabago sa payment. So, in order to understand as well yung variable payments, let's have an example. So, on January 1, 2021, an entity entered into an 8-year lease of a floor of a building with the following term. So, ito naman. So, January 21, so meron tayong 8-year lease term. So, annual rental payment niya for first 3 years ay payable ng 300. Then, the next 5 years ay 400. So, dito pala, alam mo na nagkaroon ng variable payments. Kasi sa first 3 years, ay 300 yung ibabayad niya. Tapos dun sa next 5 years, ay 400,000. So meaning dito, sa variable payments, nung nabuo yung kontrata, alam na agad nung lessee na magkakaroon ng pagbabago sa magkakaroon ng pagbabago sa pagbabayad niya. Unlike dun sa extension, kaya magkakaroon ng pagbabago dahil dun sa nangyaring subsequent events na extension option. Tapos yung implicit rate is 10%. Tapos ito nga, again, nandiyan na yung mga present value of ordinary annuity at 10% for 3 periods. Of course, kailangan magkaiba kasi magkaiba din yung binabayad nila. So first 3 periods is 300 yung pinabayad. Sa 5 periods, 400. So iba din yung ordinary annuity na times para makuha yung present value. And then the present value of 1 at 10%, kailangan ulit natin to because kailangan natin ng discounted siya mamaya. So the lease provided for neither a transfer of title to the lease or nor a purchase option. So meaning, dito sa lease contract nila, yung lease hindi siya nagpo-provide ng transfer of title, meaning hindi tina-transfer yung floor ng building dun sa lessee, o kaya naman walang kakayahan yung lessee na bilhin yung floor ng building ngayon kasi wala siyang purchase option. So ang computation natin is we have ang rental muna. Doon muna tayo sa rental na kaunahan. So we have the 300,000, i-multiply natin sa present value para nga malaman natin yung present value niya o yung current value ng future payments natin for 3 years at 10% period. So that will be January 1, 2021, ang present value niya is 746,100. Samantalang yung annual rental natin na 5 years, 400, ito i-multiply natin for 5 periods is 3.71. So ang present value natin is 1,500,000. 16,400. So, bakit ito January 1, 2024? Ito January 1, 2021. Kasi ito, present value nung first 3 terms sa January 1, 2021. Kasi itong present value na January 1, itong 1 million, ay mangyayari lang naman siya after 3 years. Kaya siya ay present value sa time ng 2024. Yun yung pinaka-start niya kasi 2024. Kaya kailangan natin siyang i-discount na naman sa present value of 1 at 10% for 3 periods kasi kailangan natin siyang ibalik sa January 1, 2021. Kaya ang magiging present value niya ng January 1, 2021 is 1,138,816. So yun nga, kailangan i-rediscount for 3 periods para malaman natin kung ano yung present value nito sa January 1, 2021. And to know the lease liability, kailangan natin ipag-add yung present value nung nauna at nung pangalawa ng January 1. So, the present value for 3 years is ito, 746,100 plus the 1,138,816. So, yung lease liability na i-journal natin, kabuuan ng January 1, 2021 is 1,884,916 pesos. So, to have table of amortization, so yun nga, yung present value, ganun din, yung payment natin, 300 sa first 3 years ay 300 sa next 5 years ay 400. Tapos yung interest nito, 10%, wala namang nagkaroon ng pagbabago, so that will be 10% nito, and then, to get the principal is payment minus the interest rate, so ito yung 111,508 pesos. So meaning, ito yung nabawas dun sa present value. Kaya, para makuha natin yung panibagong present value as of 2021, December 31, 2021, ima-minus lang natin yung present value dun sa principal nito. And also, tulad nung sa kanina, hindi din equal dito. Dapat 36,292 to. Pero dahil nga nagkaroon ng pagbabago dun sa present value factor, so nagkaroon lang ng pagbabago. So sa journal entries natin ng 2021, that will be right of use, of course, yung present value, lease liability, and then interest expense, of course. Interest expense natin, 188. Then yung lease liability, yung nabawas dun sa principal, 111,508 pesos. And then cash, kasi babayaran natin to as of December 31, 2021. Tapos depreciation natin is the present value dito, 8 years agad kasi hindi wala naman siyang nagkaroon ng pagbabago. So depreciation based sa lease term ng 8 years. So that will be 235,615 pesos. So base natin siya is 8 years. Bakit? Kasi wala namang binigay dun sa option natin na pwedeng ita-transfer kaya kailangan o kaya naman purchase option kaya walang yung depreciation the same as i-divide lang siya sa 8 years kung kailan pwedeng magamit nung lessee yung account. So that's variable payment. So iba siya sa extension. So, after knowing the extension option, after discussing the variable payments, let's go on to the lease modification. So, ano ba pag sinabi natin lease modification? Sabi, of course, nagkaroon ng pagbabago dun sa lease agreement. So, IFRS 16 paragraph 44 provides that the lessee shall account for the lease modification as a separate lease under the following conditions. So, meaning, if ever na nagkaroon ng pagbabago dun sa lease modification, ay kailangan i-account ng lessee as a separate lease yung lease modification if ever na yung modification o yung pagbabago ay nakapagpataas ng scope of the lease by adding the right of use and additional underlying asset. Like for example, nagkaroon tayo, tumaas yung right of use natin. So yun, tumaas yung right of use natin. Like for example, humaba yung lease term. So that's one of the example para yung lease modification ay i-account natin siya as a separate lease. And o kaya naman, yung rental for the lease modification ay increases by an amount commensurate with the increase in scope and equivalent to the current market rental. So meaning, yung rental natin o yung pagbabayad natin ng modification, yung pagtaas ay tumaas dun sa amount na parang katulad din sa pagtaas dun sa current market ng rental. So to have explanation pa, mas madali siya if ever na may illustration. So let's have an example. So on January 1, 2021, an entity entered into a lease agreement na ito yung following information. So yung rerentahan niya floor space ay 300 square meters, tapos yung rental payable niya at the end of each year is 100,000. Yung rate noon sa lease is 10%, and yung lease term niya na pwedeng magamit yung floor space na yan ay 8 years. And of course, the present value of an ordinary annuity, very familiar na tayo, paulit-ulit na lang, is 5.34. Tapos nung January 1, 2023, after 2 years, the entity and the lessor ay nagkaroon sila ng modification doon sa original terms na kung saan mag-add sila ng floor space imbes na 300 magiging 450 square meters, increase sa rental ng 200,000, tapos implicit rate niya ay 8% mapapababa, tapos yung present value of ordinary, of course, 4.62. So yung increase sa rental, yung pagtaas natin sa rental, for the additional 450 ay equivalent siya sa pagtaas din sa current rent. Kaya kailangan natin siyang i-account for separate lease. So, ito yung magiging journal entry sa 2021. Kailangan muna natin i-journal entry yung initial measurement. So, present value of lease term payments, of course, yung 100,000, di ba 100,000 binabayaran times the present value of ordinary annuity kanina, na 5.34, that will be the 534,000. So, that will be the lease liability. So, that will be right of use asset, 534,000 lease liability. So, December 1, so we have, okay, wait lang. Okay. So, 534,000. So, that's in December 1, we have the interest expense of 534 times 10%. That will be 53,400 pesos. And then lease liability na ima-minus lang natin yun sa cash na ibinabayad natin annually minus the 53,400. That will be 46,600. So, that yun yung bawas sa lease liability. And then the depreciation, i-divide na natin siya sa 8 kasi lease term natin ni 8. Tapos, on January 1, 2023, the entity, kailangan nga natin i-account as a separate lease. Why? Kasi nga, di ba, yung increase sa rental natin ay para siyang increase sa current market. So, the entity, kailangan nating mag-recognize ng right of use asset and lease liability for the additional 450 square meters lease on January. Dahil nga tumaas siya, kailangan nating dagdagan yung right of use natin. And there will be no adjustment, so hindi na natin i-adjust so 300. So, ang idadagdag lang natin is that ang present value natin ngayon is yung 200 natin additional increase sa rental. Ita-times lang natin siya sa 4.62, which is, that will be the for 6 periods kasi 2 periods na yung nag-expire. So, that will be 924. So, yun yung idadagdag natin sa 2023. Right of use asset, 924,000. And then lease liability. Yung interest expense, 8% na. And then lease liability, ma-minus lang natin yung 200 minus the interest expense. That will be kabawasan sa lease liability. Then depreciation natin, i-divide lang natin yung present value natin na ngayon sa 6 years kasi nag-expire na yung ating 2 years na lease term. So, 6 years na lang yung natitira. So, ito na yung pinaka-new separate lease. There will be no adjustment dito. Wala na tayong adjustment dyan. So, kung the table of amortization natin, ganyan lang din yung lalabas. Meron lang tayong pagbabago sa 2 years then sa next na 6 years. So, that's all for the lease modification. So, the next topic will be discussed by Miss Angela May Reyes. Thank you!
For us to be able to understand this lease modification, let's now have an illustration in terms of extension of lease term. On January 1, 2021, an entity entered into a lease for office space with the following information. Annual rental payable at the end of each year beginning December 31, 2021 is 200,000. Lease terms for 5 years. The implicit rate in the lease is 9%, and the present value of an ordinary annuity for 5 periods at 9% is 3.89. On January 1, 2023, the entity and the lessor agreed to amend the original lease by extending the lease term for 3 more years. So, ibig sabihin, yung entity na pagdesisyonan niya na gusto niyang i-extend yung contract for another 3 years. And of course, kapag sinabing amend, magkakaroon ng changes doon sa lease agreement. So, the annual rental payable at the end of each year, beginning December 31, 2023, is the same as the original lease, which is 200,000. But the difference is, nagbago na yung implicit rate sa lease na yon. So, from 9%, naging 11%. And the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 at 11% for 6 periods. So, bakit nga ba naging 6 periods yan? Dahil, diba, after 2 years, doon nila napagdesisyonan na i-extend nila yung lease ng 3 more years. Ibig sabihin, meron pang remaining na 3 years. At yung 3 years na yun, dadagdagan ng another 3 years, magiging 6 years na ang lease term. Kaya ang ginamit sa pagkuha ng present value ay for 6 periods, na ang value ay 4.231. Let's go now to the amortization schedule for 2021 and 2022. So the present value of the lease liability on January 1, 2021 is 778,000. Paano ito nakuha? Sa annual payment na 200,000 times 3.89. So yung present value ng original lease agreement. So on January 1, ayun na nga ang lease liability, 778,000. Then in order for us to compute the interest, ita-times lang natin yan sa 9%. And it will give us 70,020 pesos. At para makuha naman natin yung principal payment na matatanggap natin on December 31, 2021, ibig sabihin, at the end of that year, ang principal payment na natanggap natin ay 129,980 pesos. So, ibabawas natin yung interest na yon sa annual payment na natatanggap. And again, para naman makuha natin yung lease liability at the end of that year, which is December 31, 2021, 778,000 minus the principal payment. Of course, syempre nabawasan na yung lease liability na kasi nakapagbayad na. So that would be 648,020 pesos. So the same lang sa pag-compute ng interest at the end of the next year, which is December 31, 2022. So annual payment, of course, 200,000, then 9% interest, 648,020 pesos times 9%. That would be 58,322. Again, para makompute natin yung principal payment, ibabawas natin yun sa annual payment. At ang makukuha natin ay 141,678. At ang lease liability natin at the end of December 31, 2022 would be 506,342. Paano nga ba natin i-journalize yung transactions for 2021? So on January 1, we debit right of use asset worth 778,000 and we credit lease liability for 778,000 also. So napakalinaw sa atin nun. Pagdating naman na December 31 or at the end of that year, magkakaroon tayo ng interest expense and lease liability sa debit side. So magkano ang interest expense? 70,020 pesos. And lease liability, 129,980 pesos. And of course, nabawasan ng cash. Credit cash worth 200,000, which is the annual payment. Also, at the end of that year, which is December 31, 2021, we debit depreciation and credit accumulated depreciation. Ano ang value? 155,600. Nakuha natin yun dahil ang amount ng underlying asset na yun is 778,000 then divided by 5 because 5 years ang lease term. So okay, yung amortization schedule na yun ay ayun ang original lease agreement. So magkakaroon ngayon, dahil nga napag-decision na mag-extend ng lease term, magkakaroon ngayon ng bagong lease liability because of it. So the present value of new rentals on January 1, 2023 as a result of the extension is 846,200. So nakuha yon because of the annual rental payment na 200,000 times the present value, which is 4.231. And the carrying amount on January 1, 2023 is makikita natin doon sa amortization schedule ng 2021 and 2022. Dahil bago pa mag-start yung new lease liability, ito yung last na amount. Ang value niya ay 506,342. Ima-minus natin ngayon yon doon sa panibagong present value ng panibago ring rental. So nagkaroon ng increase in liability nung nag-extend. At ang value nito ay 339,858. Since there is an increase in lease liability on January 1, 2023, there will be a revised amortization schedule starting from that year until the end of the contract or end of the lease term. So on January 1, 2023, ang lease liability ay 846,200. Then we'll get the interest, which is the 11%. That would be 93,082 pesos. And for the principal payment for December 31, 2023 would be 106,918. And of course, para ma-update ang amount ng lease liability ng 2023, i-minus natin ngayon yung principal payment sa lease liability noong beginning pa lang ng taon. So 846,200 minus 106,918. So we'll get 739,282. So we'll do the same process until matapos yung lease term. So all throughout, ganun ang magiging process natin ng pag-compute ng interest, principal payment, and lease liability. We'll jump into December 31, 2027, which is lease liability is 180,336. At ang interest times 11%, 37,691 with the principal payment of 162,309. So kailangan, bago matapos yung lease term na yun, kailangan zero ang ating lease liability. So, ang principal payment dapat na ibabayad natin should be same ng lease liability before that year. So, kung 180,336 ang lease liability on December 31, 2027, ang principal payment dapat na ibabayad natin on 2028 should be the same, 180,336. So, para natin makukuha yung interest. So, para maging tama ang ating computation, subtract that principal payment to the annual payment. So, it will give us 19,664. And by that, magiging zero na ang lease liability. The journal entries for 2023. So dito na nagkaroon ng extension. So on January 1, we debit right of use asset, which is the value kung saan nag-increase yung liability natin. Remember, the increase in liability is an addition to the carrying amount of the right of use asset. So we'll understand it later on. Let's go back to journal entries. Okay, so debit right of use asset worth 39,858. And of course, i-credit natin ang ating lease liability with the same amount. At the end of that year, December 31, ang interest expense naman na binayaran natin is 93,082 pesos, which is the 11% interest. And then, kasama nun sa debit side is the lease liability dahil nabawasan na yung lease liability natin. Ang worth naman nun is 106,918. We credit cash worth 200,000, which is the annual payment. At the end of that year, depreciation, debit, and credit accumulated depreciation. So the value is 134,443. So paano ba natin na nakuha? So yung cost of right of use asset is 778,000. So kung naaalala nyo, ayan yung natin, yung right of use asset natin bago pa magkaroon ng extension. Ibabawas naman yung accumulated depreciation na nangyari noong mga naunang term. So, noong 2021 until 2022. Ita times 2 natin yon. So, that will be 311,200. And it will give us the carrying amount on December 31, 2022, which is 466,800. The increase in liability is an addition to the carrying amount of the right of use asset. So, kagaya nga ng sabi ko kanina, yung increase ng liability natin is idadagdag natin sa right of use asset. So 466,800 plus the increase in lease liability, which is 339,858. So the adjusted carrying amount is now 806,658. To further understand the value na in-input natin sa journal entry kanina on depreciation and accumulated depreciation, here's the explanation. So yung old lease term natin is originally 5 years. But then, na-expired na ang 2021 and 2022 since yun yung mga year bago pa nagpa siya na mag-extend ng lease term. So remaining old lease term is 3 years at ang extension na 3 more years. So the extended lease term is 6 years. At ang depreciation for 2023 is now 134,443, and that's the lease modification in terms of an extension of lease term. Let's go now to the decrease in scope. Para mas maintindihan natin, let's have an example. On January 1, 2021, an entity entered into a lease of office space with the following information. The floor space is 100 square meters with an annual rental payable of 40,000. The lease term is for 10 years, and then the present value of an ordinary annuity is 6.71. The present value of lease payments on January 1, 2021 worth 268,400. Paano ito nakuha? 40,000, the annual rental payable times the present value. Let's look at the table of amortization for 2021 and 2022. So, katulad lang din ng ating mga process ng pagkakompute ng mga nauna, starting from January 1, 2021, ang annual payment natin na 40,000 of course. Ang lease liability natin, yung na-compute natin kanina na 268,400 at ang interest times 8%, which will give us 21,472. Okay, para makuha natin yung principal payment for that year, at the end of that year, we'll reduce the 21,472 to 40,000 na annual payment. So, ang principal payment natin at the end of 2021 is now 18,528. Ima-minus natin ngayon yun doon sa lease liability. And it will give us 249,872 lease liability at the end of 2021. Ang magiging lease liability natin at the end of 2022 is now 229,862. Let's journalize it. Journal entries for 2021. On January 1, the right of use asset, which is debit, is 268,400, and lease liability, of course, on the credit side, which is the same amount. At the end of that year, December 31, ang interest expense naman na babayaran is 21,472 na makikita rin natin sa ating table. And the lease liability, nasa debit side. Then cash, the annual payment na 40,000. We credit it. We debit depreciation worth 26,840 and accumulated depreciation on the credit side. So, in order for us to compute it, 268,400 divided by the lease term, which is 10 years. Ang amendment of the lease. Pag sinabing amendment, ayun ay ang changes, di ba? Ang changes sa lease na pinag-agrihan ng lessee and lessor. Okay, on January 1, 2023 na tayo. The lessee and the lessor agreed to amend the original terms of the lease with the following information. Sa floor space, from 100 square meters, naging 60 square meters. And the annual rental payable for that is now 30,000. So, nabawasan ng 10,000 since ang annual rental payable before is 40,000. And the implicit rate in the lease is now 10%. And the present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 at 10% for 8 periods. Dahil, ayun na lang yung remaining years. And that would be 5.335. Since the floor space was reduced to 60 square meters, the scope of the lease was reduced by 40% because 40 square meters ang nabawas from 100 square meters. Okay, under IFRS 16, paragraph 46 states that a gain or loss should be recognized as a result of the partial termination of the lease. What does it mean? Kapag nag-reduce or otherwise, kapag nag-gain yung lessee sa pag-use ng underlying asset, ibig sabihin, kailangan natin itong i-recognize bilang resulta ng partial termination. Okay, mas maintindihan natin yan later on. Cost of right-of-use asset worth 268,400 and accumulated depreciation on December 31, 2023 is 53,680. So bakit? Yung depreciation natin nung mga naunang journal entry is 26,840 and dito times 2 natin yun. So ibabawas natin yung accumulated depreciation na yun sa cost ng right-of-use asset. So the current amount on December 31, 2022 is now 214,720. Decrease in current amount of this liability is 91,945 because the current amount bago pa mangyari yung decrease in scope is 229,862. Ito times natin sa 40%. Then the decrease in current amount of right-of-use asset is 85,888. It's because yung naunang current amount before the decrease in scope is 214,720 times 40% dahil na-reduce nga ang scope by that number. Ang mangyayari, ang difference nun is 6,057. Basahin natin to. If the decrease in carrying amount of lease liability is higher than the decrease in carrying amount of the right-of-use asset, the difference is termination gain. On the other hand, if the decrease in carrying amount of lease liability is lower than the decrease in carrying amount of right-of-use asset, the difference is termination loss. Okay, mas maintindihan natin yan. Ganito lang. Kung mas mataas yung nabawas sa lease liability natin, ibig sabihin, mas madami pa rin yung ating right to use the underlying asset. And then, sa kabaliktaran naman, ibig sabihin, kung mas mababa naman yung lease liability natin, o yung binaba ng lease liability kesa sa current amount ng right of use asset, it's a termination loss. Lease liability on January 1, 2023, makikita natin sa table natin kanina, worth 229,862. So, the reduction of old lease liability, dahil nga nagkaroon ng reduction na 40%, i-minus natin yon doon sa lease liability natin noong naunang year. So, ang magiging sagot ay 137,917. That's the remaining old lease liability on January 1, 2023 pa rin. And the present value of new rentals on January 1, 2023 as a result of the decrease in scope, 160,050 pesos. Nakuha natin yan by 30,000 na annual rental payment times the present value. Current amount of old lease liability. So, yung na-compute natin kanina, i-minus natin yun. So, that's an increase in lease liability. January 1, 2023. That's 22,133 pesos. After natin malaman ang increase in lease liability on January 1, 2023, ngayon naman ay gagawin ang revised table of amortization dahil ang table of amortization natin kanina is for 2021 and 2022 only. On January 1, 2023, lease liability is 160,050 pesos. And then to get the interest, it would be 16,005 pesos dahil tinimes natin ang 10% interest. Ang principal payment on that year, at the end of that year is 13,995 na ibabawas natin sa current amount noong beginning ng taon. At ang makuha natin is 146,055 pesos. And the process must go on hanggang matapos yung remaining na 8 more years. Okay. Let's jump into the year before matapos yung lease term. Lease liability is 27,277. By the end of the lease term, dapat zero na ang ating magiging lease liability. So, ang interest natin dyan should be 30,000, which is the annual payment, minus the principal payment na 27,277 din. Na maglilid sa atin sa 10% interest na 2,723. And by that, zero na ang ating lease liability. Dahil nagkaroon nga ng pagbabago or nagkaroon ng reduction by 40%, magkakaroon ng adjusted balances ngayon. Saan? So, right-of-use asset, the cost of right-of-use asset is 268,400. So, alam natin yan kanina kung saan nakuha. Then, accumulated depreciation worth 53,680 and current amount of 214,720. And lahat ng yon, magkakaroon ng reduction by 40%. Yung cost of right-of-use asset, magiging 107,360. Then, the accumulated depreciation from 53,680, mababawasan yun ng 40%, which is 21,472. And the current amount na 214,720 minus 85,888. So, ang balance, cost of right-of-use asset, 161,040. Accumulated depreciation, 32,208. Current amount, 128,832. At remember, kanina, nagkaroon ng increase in liability. Idadagdag natin yon doon sa cost of right of use asset. Remember, ang adjustment sa lease liability ay adjustment din sa right of use asset. So, yung balance kanina ng cost of right of use asset na 161,040 pesos plus the increase in lease liability, ang magiging adjusted balance natin on the cost of right of use asset is now 183,173. For the accumulated depreciation is 32,208. But on the carrying amount, ang carrying amount ng right of use asset na ang balance ay 128,832, i-add na lang 22,133, and that would be 150,965. Let's go now to the journal entries for 2023. On January 1, dahil nga nabawasan ang ating lease liability, remember, by 40%, right? At ganun din naman ang ating accumulated depreciation. So on the debit side, lease liability and accumulated depreciation, lease liability worth 91,945 because ayun nga, yung na-compute natin kanina. And the accumulated depreciation, ang 40% niyan is 21,472. While the right of use asset, remember, yung cost ng right of use asset natin, nagkaroon ng reduction ng 40%. So that's credit, 107,360. And remember the termination gain earlier? Kasama siya sa right of use asset na i-record natin sa journal entry. 6,057 pesos. Right of use asset, 22,133. And credit lease liability, 22,133. Di ba kailangan natin i-recognize palagi yung changes dahil nga nagkaroon ng increase sa liability, mag-i-increase din ang right of use asset. Okay, at the end of that year, 2023, December 31, 2023, the interest expense is 16,005. Ayun yung 10% interest natin on December 31. And then kasama dyan sa debit side is the lease liability, which is 13,995. And with credit cash, 30,000. For the depreciation, 18,871. And accumulated depreciation on the credit side, 18,871 also. 150,965 na na-compute natin sa depreciation natin sa naunang table. Remember, meron tayong 8 remaining years. So, i-divide natin yung doon to get the value. That's the decrease in scope. Let's go now to change in rental. Here's an illustration or an example. On January 1, 2021, an entity leased equipment with the following information. Annual rental payable at the end of each year, 80,000. Lease term for 6 years. Implicit rate in the lease, 7%. Present value of an ordinary annuity of 1 at 7% for 6 periods, 4.77. And the present value of lease rentals on January 1, 2021 pa rin is 381,600. And that's because of the annual rental payable, 80,000 times the present value. The table of amortization on January 1, 2021, the lease liability is 381,600. Katulad na na-compute natin kanina. Then at the end of that year, on December 31, the principal payment is 53,288 because the interest, which is 7% worth 26,712, minus doon sa annual rental payable na 80,000. And the lease liability for that year is 328,312 because minus na yung principal payment doon sa lease liability at the beginning of that year. And on December 31, 2022, the 7% interest from the lease liability on the year 2021 is 22,982. So the principal payment on that year is 57,018. So the lease liability is now 271,294. And at the end of another year, December 31, 2023, the lease liability is 210,285 because the 7% interest based on the lease liability on 2022 is 18,991 and the principal payment is 61,009. Journal entries for 2021. On January 1, of course, we debit right of use asset worth 381,600 and credit lease liability with the same amount. And December 31, at the end of that year, interest expense worth 26,712 with lease liability worth 53,288, which is parehas lang sa debit side. Then we credit cash worth the annual payable, which is the 80,000. And the depreciation, we debit depreciation 63,600 and the credit accumulated depreciation worth 63,600 also because 381,600 i-divide natin doon sa 6 years na lease term. the amendment of the lease. Ano bang nangyari? On January 1, 2024, the entity and the lessor agreed to amend the original term of the lease by reducing the lease payment to 70,000 and increasing the implicit rate to 9%. Okay, so from 80,000 na annual rental payable at the end of each year, napagdesisyonan ng lessee and the lessor na babawasan yon ng 10,000. So from 80,000 naging 70,000. At i-increase naman yung implicit rate from 7% to 9%. So the present value now of an ordinary annuity of 1 at 9% for 3 periods is 2.53. Okay, 3 periods kasi ayun na lang yung remaining lease term. Let's go now to the computation. Modified lease liability. Dahil nga nagkaroon ng pagbabago doon sa annual rental payable, from 80,000 naging 70,000, 70,000 times the new present value. So that would be 177,100. And the current amount of lease liability, 110,285. The difference is now the decrease in lease liability. So that's 33,185. So ang cost of right of use asset natin is 381,600. So na-journalize natin din yan ng mga naunang year. And then accumulated depreciation on January 1, 2024, since 63,600 per year ang nag-depreciate doon sa ating underlying asset, ita times 3 natin yon because that's the remaining lease term. That would be the carrying amount on January 1, 2024 worth 190,800. And remember, the decrease in liability, magkakaroon tayo ng adjustment on right of use asset kapag nagkaroon ng adjustment sa lease liability. So, ibabawas natin yun doon sa carrying amount of right of use asset. So, 190,800 minus 33,185. So, now the adjusted carrying amount of right of use asset is 157,615. Now, the revised amortization schedule or ang panibagong amortization table. On January 1, 2024, this liability is 177,100. So, of course, 70,000 dahil ayun ngayong nabago from 80,000 naging 70,000. Hindi natin yung 9% ng lease liability at the beginning of that year. So, at the end of that year, ang worth ng interest is 15,939. Ibabawas natin yun sa ating annual payment. So, we'll have the principal payment of 54,061. Then we'll deduct it to the lease liability at the beginning of the year. So, we'll have 123,039. Then, December 31, 2025, 9% interest 11,074, principal payment 58,926, and lease liability 64,113. Okay, so pagtatapos ng lease term on December 31, 2026, ang annual payment ay same pa rin, 70,000. And ang principal payment na ating ibabayad ay dapat katulad lang ng lease liability natin para maging zero ang ating lease liability. So that should be 64,113. So para makuha natin yung interest, again, i-minus natin yung principal payment doon sa annual rental payment. That will cost 5,887. Okay, para matapos tayo, sa journal entries naman tayo for the year 2024. On January 1, lease liability, 33,185. And right of use asset, 33,185. December 31, 2024, the interest expense is 15,939 based on the 9% interest. And the lease liability is 54,061. So dahil nabawasan na, yun kasi yung principal payment at the end of 2024. Okay, so nabawasan na ating cash dahil nagbayad nga tayo. And that's the annual payment na 70,000. And for the depreciation, debit depreciation, credit accumulated depreciation worth 52,538. Same amount with accumulated depreciation. So the computation is the depreciation 157,615 divided by 3 years dahil ayun ang remaining years. Okay. So that's all. Ano nga ulit yung factor sa lease modification? Una, extension of lease term. Pangalawa, decrease in scope. And pangatlo, change in rental. Again, this is Angela May Reyes. Thank you.